Today, we're going to unpack the incredible 40-year story of MedcoEnergi. Seriously, it's a wild ride, showing how a company that started with just one drilling rig in Indonesia grew into this massive, diversified global energy player. It's a fantastic lesson in strategy, guts, and knowing when to change the game.
So, here's the big question we're really digging into. How on earth does a local company, one that just drills wells for other people, completely reinvent itself to become a global giant that owns and operates energy assets all over the world? That's the puzzle we're going to piece together.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to walk through this story in 5 key parts. First, we'll look at their early days, pioneering the industry in Indonesia. Then we'll cover the huge shift they made from being a driller to a producer. After that, we'll see how they went global, then jumped into creating a new future with power generation, and finally, how they're setting themselves up for the energy challenges of tomorrow.
Okay, let's set the scene. We're in the 1980s. At this point, Indonesia's oil and gas world is completely run by massive international companies, the big players. But, well, that was all about to change.
So, in 1980, this guy Arifin Panagoro comes along with this really powerful idea to build a national champion. His company, which started out as PT MEDC Pribumi Drilling Company, was the very first privately owned Indonesian drilling contractor. Think about that. This wasn't just another business. It was a bold statement.
And wow, did they move fast. They kicked things off in 1980 as just a driller. But by 1992, they're already an exploration and production company, an E&P company, which means they're out there actually looking for the oil and gas themselves. Then, the real game changer. In '94, they go public, change their name to MedcoEnergi, and a year later, they're already using that new cash to buy up major energy assets.
Now, to really get how they grew, you have to understand something called a production sharing contract, or PSC. Here's the deal, basically. The company fronts all the money and takes on all the risk to find and produce oil and gas. If they hit the jackpot, they first get their costs back, and then they split the remaining production with the government. This whole model was the key to everything.
And that model really set them up for their biggest transformation yet. See, the company made a huge decision. They decided they didn't just want to be a contractor working for others. They wanted to be an owner, an operator. And that, right there, was a massive shift in their whole identity.
And I mean, the change was night and day. Before '94, they were a service business, making money from drilling contracts. After '94, they were an asset-based company, making money by actually producing and selling the oil and gas from fields they owned. This was a genius move, from just earning a fee to building real, long-term wealth.
This quote from their 2003 annual report just says it all. Even way back then, they weren't just obsessed with the next quarter's profits. They were playing the long game, building a company that could grow in a healthy, sustainable way. They were balancing today's profits with a much, much bigger vision for the future.
So, did the big strategy pay off? Oh yeah, the numbers don't lie. By the year 2000, thanks to some massive discoveries they made, their average daily production just exploded to almost 67,000 barrels of oil. That is a mind-blowing 62% jump in a single year. The pivot from driller to producer was paying off, big time. Okay, so they'd proven their model worked like a charm in Indonesia. What's the next move? You take it global, of course. For MedcoEnergi, the 2000s were all about explosive international growth and adding new types of businesses to their portfolio. Their big global push really kicked off in 2006. They landed a major service contract in Oman, officially planting their flag in the Middle East for the first time.
And they didn't waste any time. The very next year, they jumped across the Atlantic and bought assets in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, that's a seriously bold move, stepping into one of the most competitive oil and gas arenas in the entire world.
And that same year, 2007, was just incredibly busy. They also set up shop in North Africa and expanded in the Middle East with new operations in both Libya and Yemen. In just a couple of years, their map went from being national to truly international. But hold on, they weren't just spreading out across the globe. They were also expanding their business by moving downstream. That just means getting involved in what happens to the oil and gas after it's pulled out of the ground. They took over a methanol plant, they built an LPG plant to make money off their gas discoveries, and they even got into renewable fuels. They were building a fully integrated energy machine.
Now look, finding and selling fuel is one thing, but actually using that fuel to generate and sell electricity, that's a completely different ballgame. And that was MedcoEnergi's next major pivot, to become a real force in the power sector.
And they didn't just dip their toes in the water. No way. They built their own gas-fired power plant and won a huge contract to run a state-owned coal plant. But, and this is key, they also went all in on renewables, becoming a major investor in Sarula, which is one of the biggest geothermal projects on the planet, and they started developing solar power in Bali. This shows you they were strategically building a diverse power portfolio.
And that brings us right up to today, the final chapter. So how does a company that was built on oil and gas handle a massive global shift toward a cleaner energy future? First, let's get a term down. There's something called a CDP climate change score. Think of it like a report card for how seriously a company is taking climate change. And getting a B score, well, that's not just passing. It means the company is actively and coordinating its efforts on climate issues.
And you know, MedcoEnergi isn't just talking a big game. They've put real numbers on the board. They have committed to cutting their greenhouse gas emissions by 20% by 2025 and by 30% by 2030, all compared to their 2019 levels. These are public goals you can actually track.
So where are they today? Well, MedcoEnergi has become this incredibly diverse energy and resources company. They're in oil and gas, of course, but also power and even copper and gold mining. But tying it all together is their huge goal of hitting net zero by 2050 for their Scope 1 and 2 emissions. That just means getting rid of the direct emissions from their own operations and from the electricity they buy.
Which really leaves us with one last thing to think about. MedcoEnergi's 40-year story is all about starting local, thinking global, and constantly adapting. From a driller to a producer, from oil to electricity, and now toward a more sustainable future. Their whole journey from one single rig to this diversified powerhouse makes you wonder, right? Can one company's story actually show us what the future of energy looks like?